Well, hello there, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to you, wherever you might be in the world. My name is Anna, and today I'm delivering to you a video on one of my favourite crystals, which is Tibetan Tektite. If you're new to the channel, thank you for joining us. I hope you find the content useful. Of course, feel free to subscribe. Of course, I don't try and put pressure onto people, just remind them that if you do like it, it's helpful to my algorithms, as we continually get told when we watch videos on YouTube. If you're a returning visitor, I just want to say thank you, acknowledge your contributions, that you're here regularly, that you're a returning visitor, and that I fully appreciate it. Anyway, when it comes to Tektite, this is a crystal that I will go into a little bit more. I'll give you some background with it and how I've used it. It's one that I've put to the forefront of the playlist, and this is because I found it so beneficial when I was working at the Frontline of Human Services, and I used to gift it regularly, actually, whether it was to clients or colleagues or whoever. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. What is Tibetan Tektite? So the first thing to notice about Tektite, of course, is, as you see, it's black. It's not the most pretty crystal as far as I'm concerned. The first time I saw it, I really, I'll be honest, I wasn't that impressed by it. And I thought, in many ways, as an Australian, it looks a little bit like kangaroo poo, except that kangaroo poo is, not that you need to know this, it's rounder and smoother. Whereas when it comes to the Tektite, it's actually very irregular shapes. It's got the little pit marks on it. I'm talking about the genuine article, by the way. And it's got a really interesting texture to it. There's nothing pretty about it. And in my experience, the pieces are not big enough to become polished crystals. I don't know if there's any on the market as being polished Tektite, but they're usually quite small. And this is because they're actually the product of a meteorite, or what some of us might call a falling star, which is very hot as it comes through the atmosphere. And then when it impacts the earth, of course, it splashes everywhere, and the Tektite is the splash. Now, as I was doing the research for this particular video, because I like to draw on fact as much as I can, and even sometimes find the correct words to describe things, I don't always remember them or deliver it terribly well, but I hope that I convey the actual story. But anyway, what I found was that what I call Tibetan Tektite is actually not from Tibet. I found a research paper where it said that after soil testing and testing of minerals and everything else, a lot of what we refer to as Tibetan Tektite is actually not from Tibet. It's from, at best, surrounding areas, but the majority of it is actually from Australia. So how interesting is that? I thought, as an Australian, of course. It does, to me, make sense, though, that a lot of it is from Australia, and this is because we in Australia are aware that we've got a lot of craters, and we've got a very high mineral content across the nation, shall we say, and lots of different types. But yeah, definitely there's some craters that become lakes and that kind of stuff, depending on where you are or where you live. Now, if you do read the content where everybody's got their websites up and they're trying to market their product, they will say, quite often I found, that Tektite is best suited to people who've got the star signs of Aries, Cancer and Sagittarius. Now, I would say, I'll be honest, I'll pass this information along to you, but from my perspective, crystals work well with anybody, regardless of their star sign and their astrology. I don't think there's any contraindications as per astrology or any particular star sign that's going to get greater benefit because of their star sign. But I will say certain personality types will benefit from one crystal as opposed to another, more so than another person. So, for example, if we look at what Tektite is, it's actually a boundary protector, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So it's very good for people that are empaths and this kind of thing, as part of helping them to remain stable. So from that perspective, it makes sense that it would be well suited to Cancer, who of course is extremely sensitive, and most of the Cancers, actually, I say. So where I say that I don't believe people benefit from a star sign perspective, from a personality type, yes, I'll just throw a little contraindication there, or a conundrum, or whatever type of word we use to describe it. I've had a lot to do with cancer because they're in my family. And I do know that they are very sensitive people, each single one of them. I've got 4 out of 6. And so I can understand why it's recommended for somebody with a star sign of Cancer. So going forward a bit with that, yes, if you know somebody who's super sensitive and tends to take things personally, they would definitely benefit from wearing Tektite. With the Aries, of course, they can be a little bit reactive to perceived slights. So yes, they will definitely benefit. And the same with the Sag. But, I've got to say, most Sages that I know are fairly well grounded anyway. And in my notes, I've actually drawn up, I've relayed, or I've stated a scenario that I thought I might share with you. And this is because there is this push when I was doing my degree, my studies in mental health and that kind of stuff, that if you want to help people, you've got to get down into the abyss and sit with them in quiet as they gather strength or whatever. And now, I don't agree with that. If anybody is actually aware of these kind of quotes, they come from Brené Brown. Now, I'm sure Brené Brown is a lovely lady, but this is one thing that almost got me failed at university. And this is because I understand trauma. I have lived through it, and I've supported many, many people on the human services front line. And my experience, people that know intense and enormous suffering would never ask somebody else to feel that pain that they carry and to sit behind them. They would be more likely to turn around and say, listen, I'm at the bottom of the well, you're at the top, can you throw me a floaty and just keep it secure while I drag myself out of this? Just knowing you're there is enough for me. But that's my experience of it. And the reason why I feel this story is relevant, because we are talking about the zodiacs and we are talking about personality types, is because when we are working at the front line of industry with all of this pain and suffering, if you allow yourself to be bogged down into the pain and suffering of those people, then you are not able to actually effectively offer them real practical support and help to overcome whatever it is they're addressing. So I'm just going to leave that there and step on to giving a little bit more information about Tektite. So, just to be clear, there are some people that say the metaphysical attributes include astral traveling. I'm not somebody that's going to say that because that's not part of my experience. But if you've had that experience, please feel free to put your comments up. From my perspective, Tektite is, I wouldn't say limited. I would say that it has a very focused metaphysical approach. And it really is, in the first instance, be grounded, be practical. So if you've got tendencies to go off with the fairies, then you would benefit from wearing, Tektite. But when I say going off with the fairies, okay, this is where people, basically, they're not dealing with their reality. Let's say that you had a choice there. Money's short, money comes in, and you get conflicting needs come in. You might have to pay the rent, or one of your kids needs a pair of shoes. And they will turn around and go, well, I've got the money here. Kitty needs the shoes. Rent needs to be paid. What will I do? I'll buy the shoes for the kid because that's what it needs. And then actually be evicted from the house because they're doing this all the time and they fall behind in their rent. So this is about being grounded, clarity of thought, being able to prioritize effectively, and to have these really secure boundaries when needed, and this auric protection to ensure that you don't allow yourself to be distracted from achieving your practical goals, shall we say. So it's very stabilizing, it's very balancing. And when we have this stable, balanced and grounded approach to life, to be able to deal with our physical reality, that is like setting the solid foundations of a house. We're building the basis to be able to put the roof on and do that high level stuff later. That's the way I see it. And probably one of the reasons why I don't agree with those people that say that you use Tibetan Tektite for astraling. Not in my experience. It's not something that I've observed with it anyway. But having said that, I would only ever wear my Tektite as I was leaving the house in the mornings. I would put it on and I would take it off as I came through the door and allow it to be cleansed and recharged. And I'll talk about that more in the care part of the video. So I said that I was going to talk about the mineral information on the Tibetan tektite, or what we call Tibetan tektite. And this is basically just to give you an introduction to help you with your purchasing. Now, what I have found very interesting is there is so much conflicting information online. If you start Googling just the Tibetan tektite, you're going to find a heap of information saying they're not meteorites, they're not this, they're not that. And yes, they are from Tibet, and they will apply all these different meanings to them, but none of them cite a source. Okay, so that makes them very lacking in credibility, shall we say, because they can't identify who said that they are found in Tibet and all the rest of it. So what I've done is I've actually found a source to substantiate what it is that I'm talking about, which is that this particular author at an international conference on crystals, and I believe we are looking here at a geologist, and a lunar conference, because where some sites will turn around and say that tektites are not part of meteor splash, this particular conference, this guy's been studying and researching tektites for a long time, and he says obviously clearly they are, but he makes the point that anything that's being passed off as Tibetan tektite is actually of the Australasian version. So that doesn't necessarily mean Australia. It can mean I think even the Philippines might fall in that catchment area, but basically it's outside of Tibet is where I'm going. So I've put this little link up there so that you can actually go and read the paper yourself if that's what you're into. It's a little bit scientific for me, and it just does my head in. Suffice to say, when we talk about the hardness of tektite, because that's the important bit from a physical perspective for us when it comes to caring for these crystals, it really is important to notice that, or to pay attention to the fact, it's probably midstream hard. When you hold them in your hand, you feel like it feels like they're very hard, and you don't think that they're going to break easily, but they actually do. If you drop it on the ground, it's going to shatter because it's actually like a glass. I mean, some of them it takes a little bit more to break them, I'll be honest, not that I've gone out there and deliberately tried to do it, but I think some of the shapes, the way that these droplets form, some are more hardy and more resilient to being dropped than others. But anyway, let's look at the metaphysical properties in a little bit more. Actually, before we do that, let's take a look at what you can expect, some buying tips when trying to buy tektite. So on the left-hand side, we've got an image here of what is presumably, or what is being sold as, polished, tumbled tektite, okay? I find that pretty hard to believe, and frankly, I wouldn't want to buy it, okay? Each to their own. If you're a retailer and you're selling that, I'm sorry, but I certainly don't recommend it. Not really. I can't, it just doesn't make sense to me to actually do that. It does look a bit prettier, though, than the ones that in the center page that are, obviously, as I say, looking a bit like kangaroo doo-doo. This photo, though, doesn't actually give them justice, because in their natural state, once they've been washed, they do have a little bit of a sheen on them. Not as much as this tektite pendant that we've got on the right. I don't know if that's been treated with something. Perhaps it was varnished. It looks a bit like that to me. But either way, I would say if you're going to buy it, don't get too distressed by the shape of it. Like when I ordered my first one, I did actually buy online. And this is the thing to remember too, when people are putting up their information on their websites, what you find is they tell you a heap of stuff about this is its properties and it's brilliant for X and Y, and now I'm going to charge you $26 for this tiny little crystal that looks a bit like a doo-doo. I'm so facetious sometimes, sorry about that. Okay, so where I'm going with this is they have a vested interest in encouraging you to believe stuff, and they may believe it themselves, even if they haven't actually experienced. I'm going to go back to the astral travel with this. If somebody is turning around and saying that Tibetan tektite is great for astral traveling, well, they might believe that. They might not know from personal experience from my perspective, though, just trying to be logical and rational about things, is if you've got a crystal, which I know from experience is extremely grounding, I don't see how that could be good for astral, okay? Because if it's grounding, it's grounding. It's helping you retain close to the earth, if you like. If we're talking about something that's about astral, then we're talking about, I think it might be, if I was to use a metaphor, it would be like tying bags of sand to a bird and saying, now go fly, do the best you can. You're not going to get very high with it, is the point that I'm making. And if people are trying to astral, they actually want to go places. They don't want to be sort of scooting along, close to the ground. But anyway, buying tips, okay? Don't be worried about the shape of it. Don't be worried if it's not too shiny. Don't be worried either if it's got all these lumps and bumps and it's irregular, because this is what tektite is. And when I bought mine, this is why I ended up giving so much of it away. I found a supplier and I thought I was buying one, and Tibetan Tektite wasn't very expensive at the time. And what happened was they sent me about 4 and it was very cheap. So what I did was I went back and I bought bulk more, especially after I found how well it worked, and because I was working, as I say, at the front line of human services, and I gave it away to my colleagues as well, because they were struggling with some of the situations that we had to deal with. So either way, when we look at this central plate, I think this is the best one to look at again, is you can see there is no clear-cut definition of what does a piece of tektite look like. It can actually just look like a big splash, If you've ever seen molten metal or dropped an egg and a little bit of, into water to poach it or whatever, you see immediately breakaway bits that form their own shape. Well, this is the same with tektite, okay? So from a metaphysical perspective, and energetic, these are the kind of benefits associated with Tibetan Tektite. I must say, auric protection and boundaries are up there at the top for me. Grounding to assist with practical decision making is second. And of course, when we talk about grounding, we're actually talking about the alignment of the spiritual body and the auras. This is all part of this. So we can use these 2 sentences that I say, well, it's about auric protection and boundaries, and it's about grounding. It's like, well, it doesn't do much, does it? Well, this is how you do it all, okay? When you're grounding and you're balancing your auric layers and all the rest of it, you are actually doing a real lot. You're opening pathways. So where the other people said astral travel, I would say, look, it might assist you with telepathic communication. It may assist you with conscious dreaming, clairvoyance and clairaudience. Not as I've noticed, okay? But remember, I was wearing it in the workplace, and the last thing I would want to be doing is telepathically communicating with my clients, especially with some of the stuff they had. It primarily for me was a protective talisman. And does it facilitate growth and personal transformation? I think it does. I would say it probably does. I want to explain a little story about how it worked, and I'll try and keep it brief as an example of my client base and why it was beneficial, because within, if you're not aware of it, people that work at the front line of human services, and by that I mean people that are housing officers, perhaps they might be mental health support workers, care workers, this kind of thing. They are going in and out of people's houses all day long and basically coming across all sorts of crises and suffering when they visit people a lot of the time, because it's not just about the person they visit. It may be their neighbours, their friends, their family might be there. They could be have extended family with substance abuse problems. There might be domestic violence, all of this stuff. And people are walking in and out of it. Now, in the job that I was in, we were walking in and out of people's houses all the time, and it really was those people that were like, what do you call it? A hair away from homelessness. We were trying to keep these people in their houses and work with them to get them to a level of function. And so an example of how this worked, all these people that turn around and say, oh, I can't, I'm an empath, I take on board other people's pain and suffering, I could never do that work. Well, the thing is, if you really care, then get out there and go and do the work, but make sure that you care for yourself in the process. And Tibetan Tektite is a way of doing this. So yes, also I'm susceptible to other people's emotional states, but I put it down to the fact that I was wearing this Tektite that allowed me to go into these types of situations. And I'll give you a scenario. I had a client who was I'm not going to give you a whole story, I'll just tell her a little bit. But basically, I went over there. Her house was being broken into regularly while she was in the house by people that were using it basically for unlawful activities. And she used to hide in a bedroom, suffering. And one day I went over there and I've walked in and I thought, she's smashed up all of her furniture. I mean, her buffets and everything else were all smashed up. She'd had an axe in there. And I recall saying to her, look, what's been going on here, And she said, I don't have any money for firewood and it's been freezing. And I was like, oh, this is just terrible. What can I do to help this woman? You've got to be pretty desperate to be smashing up your buffet. And then when we sat there, because in the end I was listening to her problems and trying to work out how to solve these problems. But on this particular day we sat there, she was generally fairly transparent, but this particular day she wasn't. And we just sat there and I said, look, I'm so worried about you. I said, I'm not going to leave until we've worked something out to be able to assist you. And I've sat down with her and we're just sitting there in silence on the couch, her on one chair, me on the other. And I thought, I just feel like I need to be here. And eventually, after about half an hour, she turned around and she told me she was struggling because she'd learned that one of her children had taken its life within 2 weeks earlier, which she hadn't shared with me. The child lived in a different town. And then she said, my problem right now is, she said, not only have I lost this child, she said, but I don't have the money to bury it. And I was like, right, I definitely am not leaving you. And then I had the lights come on where it was, has she even got food for tonight? So within all of that, of course, she's too humble to ask for help, I realised. So I ran back to the office and I got her some food because it was the end of the day and gave her something to eat. And I said to her, I was worried about leaving her on her own, actually, but I realised I have responsibilities to myself, my family, my children. And we as individuals can't compromise that. What I did with this lady, I said, listen, I know your phone's not working. And I said, but I'm coming here first thing tomorrow morning. I explained to her, I said, I don't want to leave you. I told her the truth. I want to stay here tonight with you, but I can't because of my own family, which she understood and she accepted because she's a mother. And she said, you go home, love. She said, no, I'll wait for you. So I tell you what, I was knocking on that door first thing in the morning, but you have to, it becomes a developed skill to be able to work with people with that level of suffering and grief happening in their lives, to then let that go so that when you get home, you can give 100% to your family, your children, and your personal responsibilities. Now, I found Tektite helped me with this. So I would put that Tektite on as I was walking out the door. And as I said, as I came through that door, that Tektite was taken off and it was hung up. And I was mum again when I came through the door. And when I went out the next day, I was then the caregiver again. So this is about protecting boundaries and to be able to give 100% to every scenario you find yourself in. So when we look at the emotional and psychological metaphysical benefits of Tektite, you can actually see within that scenario that I just painted for you how Tektite assists with this. Helping to let go of what isn't ours, keeping this balanced care of others and care of self, and to be able to be balanced with the empathy and not allow us to block and prevent us from interacting with other people. And I didn't realise that actually, until I was typing this up, that actually, it really does enhance and promote emotional self-control and this creative solution finding and decision making. Now, when it comes to the metaphysical properties of Tektite, it's my belief that it actually does help you to become more aware of what is going on within your physical body. And this is through enhanced sensitivity, shall we say. So, that can, unless it's clearly articulated, we don't want to be emotionally sensitive, but we want to be able to recognize, become aware of changes within our own body function, sensitive to what's going on, so that we can respond to any potential health problems in a timely way for an early intervention. And a lot of the times, I like to give examples because that helps to draw pictures in people's mind. Okay, so let's say my father has got diabetes, and one of the problems with diabetes is poor circulation. And he has expressed to me that he's now got neuropathy in his feet, so he struggles to walk and to retain his balance when he's walking. And apparently, what happened was he was getting the early signs of it, but he didn't have a proper GP. We would say his GP was questionable. And so when he used to go along and say, look, I've got pins and needles in my feet, the doctor wasn't putting together that actually this is a symptom for diabetics, that there's becoming neural damage. So consequently, my father now lives with permanent neural damage to his feet, which is neuropathy. So where I'm going with this is when we talk about sensitivity, the first sensitivity is to that I've got pins and needles. This is something that's going on with his physiology, which could have been able to be addressed. And so therefore, yes, I would put that down. If you were wearing Tektite and working with Tektite, then you'll start to get these early warning signs about something that's not quite right, or something that's different, something that needs further investigation within your own body. And that doesn't mean you go, oh, I've got pins and needles in my feet, I'm going to use Tektite and that's going to cure my diabetes. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, I don't know. But it certainly is, I need to go to the doctors and have this checked out and see if it's something more than just pins and needles. So from a chakra perspective, given the traits that I've talked about with Tektite, I've put an extra little lotus flower, shall we say, on this image here, because there is a chakra there, and this is why I say I must actually upgrade this image that I've got here. The chakra that sits at the foremost bottom of your aura is actually called the Earth Star. So I don't think you're going to find this content anywhere else. This is my interpretation. This is my understandings. I believe when you work with Tektite, you're actually working with your root base chakra and your Earth Star, because this is about creating that solid, grounded connection. Having said that, I'm going to stick with that. I am going to stick with the fact that, yes, it is the base chakra and the Earth Star, but I believe the colour also influences the metaphysical properties of the Tektite, because I'm going to say that it actually carries, in my belief, it carries feminine aspects as well, which is the yin, the nurturing, the caring aspect as well. And that's that balanced empathy that we talked about before. So a way that you could use, or a couple of ways that you could use Tektite, obviously, is the jewelry pendant. You could actually, if you were going to do a healing session on yourself and use your crystals, you could place some Tektite by your feet. I always wore my Tektite pendants on a leather cord. But, another option to that, if you don't feel the need to be wearing it every day, if you're not on the front line, you could actually meditate and hold it and basically put to the universe, if you like, is there any boundary issues that you need to be addressing, that kind of thing. Or there's another big or you could put it around your house to promote healthy relationships with respect to other people's boundaries, and respectful communication that lends itself towards conflict resolution. So when it comes to crystal care, it is really, really important that you take care of it, especially if you are on the front line. Now, the reason I'm going to explain this is because Tektite is considered to be an absorber in much the same way. If we had a sponge in the kitchen sink and we washed the dishes, we wring that sponge out, we wipe the bench down, then, so before each function, we actually squeeze the ick, if you like, out of the sponge, and then we use it again. Well, the same has to be said for tektite, okay? It absorbs. So when you are out, this is my understanding of it. When you're out working, it's going to pick stuff up and it needs to be cleaned every single night you come home. If you are doing readings from home and you use it to protect your boundaries, if you're a metaphysical worker, if you wear it while you're doing treatments and that kind of thing, at the end of each treatment, if you've got a number of tektites, you might want to swap your tektites over and cleanse and charge them in between times. I mean, it's up to you. Follow your own guidance and intuition. But where I'm going with this is, so when I say I gave everybody a piece of tektite, not only did I give them, and I'm talking about the colleagues, I didn't give them to the whole world, but I always gave them a little piece of selenite as well, because this is back in the day when I used to sell the stuff. And so I would find, because I had a lot of logs and that kind of thing, that I would have bits of selenite break off, just small bits. So it was no issue to me to turn around and say, here's a tektite and here's some selenite. And because they were pendants that I was giving out, not the stones, I was actually giving out pendants. Just when you get home from work at the end of each day, just pop it on the selenite. Now, in my instance, the reason I put these images up is because I have selenite towers and lamps. And so when I say that I used to take it off and put it on coming in and out the house, when I walked in the door after work, I would have the cord already being lifted over my head as I came in. It was just a regular routine that I got into, and the lamp would be there. I like the lamp for this for some reason. I think it's because it glowed, as with this image here. And then I would just hang the pendant over the top of the tower so that the tektite came in direct contact with the selenite. And then as I was leaving, because of the placement of the lamp, there was a visual prompt for me every morning as I walked out the door to pick the pendant up on the cord again and simply put it over my head as I went in and out. So I hope I have explained that clearly. You may have different methods of how to clear and cleanse tektite, and I think it would be very helpful for many people if you shared what you did. Or how you do it. Now, the other thing to be clear as well is that was my daily routine with the tektite. The other things that I do is, as I've said before, I may put them out under the moonlight. I may put them out on a rainy night and let them get exposed to moonlight and raindrops, actually, because I love rain for cleaning crystals. It can cope with water, okay? You could do the burying. I don't know about exposure to sun. They certainly will cope with being saged. As I said, if you drop it on the floor, though, it can shatter. So just be careful with that. It is hard. It doesn't really scratch that easily, okay? And it doesn't tend... Actually, I was going to say, yeah, look, if you put it with a soft crystal together side by side, you might actually damage the soft crystal with the tektite, okay, because it is a bit irregular shaped and it can be a bit scratchy towards other crystals. So while there is no specific message associated with tektite itself, for me, because I've said before, I have the lucky dip. I've got a couple of them actually, which is just containers full of crystals and tumbles. And when I've got people over and they're doing a reading, I get them to put their hand in and pull a crystal out. Now, if they pulled out a tektite, I would be definitely having a conversation with them about their boundaries and trying to explain to them the differences of self-care and care for others, and the consequences and negative impacts of being an over empathizer, and that the best way of helping other people is to keep this clarity of vision and to keep this clarity with your boundaries. Keep that line in the sand tight. That will definitely help. Don't blur them. Don't blur the lines. Don't blur the boundaries. And I might, depending on the person, even open a door conversation to what people call energy vampires or energy suckers, because I'm a believer in the law of reflection. And if somebody's pointing at somebody else saying that person sucks and drains the energy and the life force out of everybody, I would be looking at the accuser, shall we say, more closely and asking them why they think that. And do they think perhaps they might be that way? Because oftentimes when we've got problems, because we're all human, we forget to be sensitive to other people's needs, and we don't even realize that we're doing it until it's pointed out to us. So quite often I think what we see in other people is, when I talk about the reflection, is the reflection of us. Now, I'm also one that turns around and says, not all reflections are saying, that twinkle, twinkle, little star, what you say is what you are, that we grew up with. Sometimes it's about that. In fact, actually, a lot of the time I believe it is. But other times that reflection shows us perhaps something that we've overcome about ourselves that was a problem for us in the past. And yet other times, something that offends us greatly shows us our moral values. It shows us an aspect of ourselves that is about our sense of personal value and morality. But at the very least, I'd be asking them or encouraging them to take a look at their personal boundaries, professional and spiritual, because they all go hand in hand. So, my friends, that is it for today. That's about all I can give you as far as Tektite goes, unless you ask me some questions and prompt me to have a think about it a bit more, and I might be able to come up with some other information. So feel free to write any questions, write some thoughts, write your own experiences. The other thing that I'm going to do, if you've managed to make the video this far, is I actually am, on this Sunday's Yarning, I'm going to be providing some buying tips, because with me doing the research for this playlist, I've actually found that oh my goodness me, I love crystals. My crystal addiction has been sort of triggered a bit, so I've had to go out and buy a few crystals is where I'm going. My gluttony has got out of control, not too badly. I've only bought the one piece. But what I'm doing is I'm seeing crystals for sale, and I'm looking at the prices, and I'm looking at the processes, and I think it's time that I actually updated and revised my buying tips for people to help them out, just to be mindful of things, to be cautious of things and how they can go about it. But anyway, thank you for being part of my journey today. Until next time, I shall say love you, leave you, catch you on the next one. Bye-bye for now. Take care.